Good afternoon. I'm Monisa Klein here at the GBTA broadcast studio. And here with me today is Eddie Raleigh, who is the partner at Fragomen, which is a law firm. Eddie, welcome.
Thank you. Thank
Great
you for having
to have
me.
you. Yes. And welcome to GBTA. Hope
Thanks.
It's been a good couple of days for you.
It's been exciting. It's my first one.
Good. Well, welcome. We're glad you're here.
Yeah, me too.
And I understand you participated in a panel earlier today on the topic of compliance. How did that go?
It went well. It went well. So we covered a number of things about building the case to have a compliance program for your global mobility and your business travelers. So the main premise and take home was the importance of having something in place before your program gets too big, or how to manage the change of building a compliance program around a program that already exists.
Good advice. It seems that government agencies around the world are being more scrutinizing and scrutinizing visa and global mobility programs more than ever before, or that's what I'm hearing. Is that true? And if so, why?
It is. It is. So there are a number of trends going on out in the, geopolitical forces around the world, economic forces, the crunch in the tech sector, as well as, the global economic forces in China are putting pressure on governments to protect local workers. And so you can see this, you saw it in the United States, you saw it in the UK with Brexit, it's ongoing in Italy and France. And so all over the world, we're seeing, populist movements lead to greater protection of the domestic workforce. Now, how this affects a business traveler is actually kind of one step removed, because most work visas, if a person needs a work visa, they get a work visa, and many companies pay attention to that. But what we're seeing is that governments are really scrutinizing your everyday business traveler, and it's especially as the difference between what constitutes productive work, which is usually what you need to have a work visa for. They have an expanding definition of that in many countries and are looking harder at it as jobs become more white collar in nature. So the bottom line is, the trends are real. We're seeing them on a regular basis, and particularly here in the United States, my practice is enforcement, defense, and compliance, and so we've certainly seen an uptick in the past 6 to 8 years.
Gosh, gotcha. And your message today was really be ready, right? Be ready.
Be ready.
Be prepared. So
have a compliance program in place before people travel, so that if there is a problem and an employee goes rogue, you have something to fall back on to protect your company. And also, it's a mechanism to educate employees about what they can and can't do when they travel.
Good. So on that note, how often should companies be reviewing their internal processes and programs to ensure compliance?
So that really depends upon whether the company has an ongoing compliance program. If you don't have one, then there's nothing to monitor against. There's nothing to update. So the first thing you want to do is ensure that you have a policy to look back on. And what I tell people is, you want to have a live document that's updated over time, but once a year is a regular process for a company. I think the big point to take home here is, if you have a problem, that's when you really need to update your compliance program, because the way the government views these things here and throughout the world is, if you have a problem one time, you might be able to explain it as a rogue employee, or you might be able to explain it as something that happened as out of the ordinary. But if you don't address that risk for the future, that's where a government really looks to hold a company accountable.
Good point. And what are some of the risks of non-compliance?
Sure. So there are multiple ways to look at this, because there are risks to the person, the traveler, and then to the business. And I like to think of them as a bit of a Venn diagram. They certainly overlap, but there's also independent risks. So for the traveler who violates their status while in a country, it can prevent them from getting back into that country. Many countries share information And so what that means is that you might, if you get caught coming into the U.S. trying to work, do productive work, let's say, the classic case is a construction where you can't come here to build something. You can come here to talk about building something, but not to build it. Talk about turning the wrench, but you can't turn it, So you get caught coming in to turn the wrench. What happens then? Well, you can not be allowed to enter the United States again, maybe not Canada, maybe not the UK, maybe not Mexico, because of that issue that occurred here. And so that's an issue for the individual and frankly for the company if they need that person. For the companies, there are large fines available to the government to the extent that the government agency determines that the company perpetrated a fraud, willfully misrepresented the purpose of the person's trip, or told the person to do so. That can lead to fraud convictions and serious fines, forfeiture of the profits of the company from that trip or from that visit. And so there are serious consequences, and there are more and more depending upon the companies in the country. Yeah.
Wow, good to be compliant. So as we head into the latter part of 2023 and looking ahead into 2024, what are some key trends that you're seeing and that companies and individual travelers need to prepare for?
That's a great question. And I think the overall trend toward more immigration control, even though everybody tends to think about it as refugee, in Europe, refugees at a border or migrants at the southern border of the United States. The same political winds that blow on those issues lead to stricter controls for business travel. And it goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, but those trends have really resulted in some shifts. So, for example, Americans traveling to the EU and to the UK for the first time ever are going to have to get what is basically a travel permit, and it's called an ETA. But the end all and be all of it is the day of traveling on your American passport to go anywhere for tourism or business is coming to an end, and the countries are moving in that direction. And along the same lines is with the protection of the local workforce, is governments taking a harder line, looking at anti-discrimination. And this comes from, other political trends that are sort of cross ways sometimes, but where governments are looking at anti-discrimination laws and other ways to protect the local workforce over time. So it's a global trend in the United States here, and in Great Britain. I think people know the examples, the election of Donald Trump and then subsequently Brexit. I hope I got the order right there. And the elections that we're seeing in Europe now. So I suspect that those trends will continue into 2024. But the bottom line for businesses is to think about it, and your leadership can't make a risk-based choice that they don't know is a choice. And so it's about people in the travel industry or in the business travel industry, global mobility, to be letting their leadership know these are trends, these are some of the things we do, this is where the risks are, so that those leaders can make decisions about what's best for the company.
Excellent. Well, Ed, you've given a great recap and summary of, I think, some of the hot issues around compliance and the importance of being compliant and really being able to articulate, and for travel managers and people in this business to articulate the issues and the consequences, right, of being compliant or not. So thank you for spending a few minutes with me today. I really appreciate it. And I hope you have a great trip back to DC.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm Moniza Klein here at the GBTA Broadcast Studio.